Good evening.
I get two, Margaret.
I want to welcome everyone here this evening. It's great to see a turnout. I know we have a lot of competition this evening, but we've got a great program planned for you. And the life of Dana Point founder Anna G. Walters is going to be viewed tonight through photos and some documents. And there's more in the exhibit downstairs in the museum. And after this program, we're going to go downstairs, and we want you to join us and have beverages of your choice. And there's lots of goodies down there too that our board members have brought, so we hope you will join us there. We wouldn't be doing this tonight if it weren't for the fact that Janet Guy visited the Historical Society last year with her daughter Deanna Guy Madsen and her husband Peter and their children when they were visiting for Denmark. So Janet, raise your hand, is the inspiration for this exhibit. And then she told Stephen and David, her sons, who are Anna Walters' great-grandsons, that they should send us some information and photos. So they then loaned us the photos that we're going to view tonight and downstairs. And they are from the Marguerite and Alfred Eugene Guy family photos, and they're on loan to us from the Family Photo Archive of David Andrew Guy, who's right there in the corner. And so now he is the patriarch of the family.
Ow.
Excuse me? What did I say? Oh, okay. Well, Hal is the Hal would be the great nephew. Yes, he's older.
He's the patron.
He's the patriot. Okay. All right. I stand corrected. And then, and unfortunately, Hal couldn't be with us this evening. He's 97 and he has food poisoning of some kind, and his wife Ursula is home with him. But we have a photo of the two of them, and Keith and I were fortunate enough to have lunch with them last year. Was that last summer or so? And he is has a wonderful memory of his years between the time he was 7 and 12 here in Dana Point. And we're losing somebody already. Oh, Stephen has a bird's eye view, and you can see that someone was locked out. That door is locked. And then, let's see. So I think I've covered everybody, but what I want to do is have Stephen come to this podium and just introduce the family. Then we're going to see the slides, or the slides.
Hello, Dana Point. How are you guys? Thank you. My name is Stephen Guy. I'm the youngest great-grandson of Anna Walters. On my far left, on your right, in the Barney shirt, is my eldest brother, David. He was the recipient of most of our family archive when my father, Andrew Guy, passed away. He and I spent this last summer going through many of those pictures so that we could pull out any that we identified as being the Anna Walters that you're honoring here today. Next to David is his youngest, Mark. Next to Mark is my son, Eugene, who is named after my uncle Gene, and also after my grandfather, Alfred Eugene, who married Anna Walters' adopted daughter. Next to him, that hot redhead, is my wife, Mona. Easy's twin, Violet. Violet's older sister, Ruby. And my mom, Janet. We were thrilled this week to come down here and engage in some family history. We had not heard a lot of stories about Dana Point from our family, and upon coming down here and meeting Hal for the first time, our cousin, who was actually at my grandfather's wedding in the early 1900s, he was able to, 1921 was it? 29. we were able to sit with him and learn some family stories, and among those were stories about Anna Walters choosing the names of several of the streets in your town, among them Ruby Lantern, Violet Lantern. We were really hoping to find a Eugene Lantern. No such luck. It would have been a jackpot day for our family if that had happened. Anyway, thank you for having us down. We're enjoying ourselves immensely. Most of us are from Montana. By the way, yeah, I'm sorry. Hal's granddaughter is here with us. We met her, our cousin, for the first time this week, Michelle. We're hoping that Michelle has a lot of the knowledge of Hal built into her DNA.
No pressure.
If that's not the case, we're going to sneak out and get a glass of wine.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. So now, this is going to be awkward, but I'm going to ask the guys to turn their chairs around so that they can see the slides too. And Keith and I are going to try to do justice to all the materials and some of the photos that they have sent us. Pardon me? Yeah, lights down would be great. I think we're saying something, we're so preoccupied with. Okay, great. And I can still see, I think. Okay. So Anna G. Walters was born in 1873. One of the amazing things I've noticed when you're looking at these photographs is how much styles changed in the period, even from this wouldn't surprise Heidi because she's studying things like costuming, but there's big changes between the 80s and the 90s, the 1800s, and then the 1920s, 30s, big changes, which I think you'll notice in these photos. Anna was born in Winneshiek County, Iowa, to William M. Eimers and Mary Elizabeth Unger Eimers. They were immigrants from Prussia. In 1880, the Eimers family moved to Stearns, Platte County, Nebraska. Mr. Eimers moved his store to Humphrey, established a warehouse and a grain mill there. By 1890, I think Hal said in 1888, his mother said that the family moved to the Los Angeles and Orange County area. So they were in this area. We don't find them in the census in 1890, so they must have somehow missed that in their, getting settled. In 1893, Anna married Frank M. Walters on July 11th at the Catholic Church in Santa Ana, and they moved to Anaheim Township, where Frank owned and farmed a large orange grove. In 1896, Anna's mother, Elizabeth Unger Eimers, died as a result of a runaway horse accident in Santa Ana. She was a resident of Orange, and she was only 60 years old when that happened. In 1899, William Eimers remarried Louisa Zuber, who was 29 years his junior. In 1901, Anna's brother-in-law, Frank Casey, died, leaving her sister Catherine Eimers Casey with 4 children on a dairy farm in Los Angeles. And her daughter Edith dies in 1904 of an ear infection at 10 years of age. And she was, what's happening?
You had to do the wrong place.
Oh, okay, well, we'll see her later, I guess. But she was a darling little girl, and she died at the age of 10. And today that would have been avoided with antibiotics. In 1904-05, Anna and Frank Walters legally adopted Anna's niece, Marguerite Casey. And so you're going to want to advance to that. Oh, there's the picture of Edith, the little girl. She's the older of the 2 little girls. The little girl is Marguerite, right, Stephen? Yeah. And then this picture is sort of posed, I don't know if this is ballet class or if it was one of those pictures that you take because you're building a portfolio and you want to go into acting, but Stephen said that they thought she was interested in that. So, but she is older at this time. She was 10 years old when she was adopted by Anna and Frank Walters. One of our, that's Marguerite, what did I say?
Well, you did.
Okay, this is Marguerite, probably in her mid to late teens, yes. And again, they legally adopted her, and she was Anna's niece. And then Catherine Eimers Casey, her mother, married Nils Anderson. So I don't know if you're following along there, but Catherine had 4 children. Her husband dies. She's on a dairy farm with 4 little kids. One child dies of an ear infection. And Marguerite was close to her aunt Anna, and she is adopted by her. Okay, this was something that I just found out in the last 10 days, just when I thought I had everything done. Keith was looking up some other information. In 1913, a suit for divorce was filed March 17th by Anna G. Walters against Frank M. Walters. The interlocutory degree was granted on June 14th, 1913. And then Carlos previously thought that Frank had died around 1915, but we didn't find a death certificate to that effect. But we did notice in some newspaper articles that she was referred to a divorcee as once, and then after that a widow. In 1917, Anna and her 22-year-old daughter, Marguerite, met a man by the name of George A. Fox at a dance in Seal Beach. Fox posed as a wealthy Oregon rancher who convinced Anna to turn the management of her ranch over to him. In 1917, her father, William M. Eimers, died, willing his estate to his stepdaughter and widow. Anna's older sister objected, and Carrie A. Lovell, which is her name, contested his will. Do we have a picture of Carrie, Keith? There's Carrie. Oh, okay. Could you go back one slide, Keith? Yes, that slide. Okay, so on the left, and this is, an old photo that we got through archives, and so it's not like today, but even then that can be difficult. So on the left is Marguerite Casey Walters, the adopted daughter of Anna Walters, who's on the right. And in the cameo below is George Fox. Anna pressed embezzlement and perjury charges against Fox. The case went to court 15 times by 1919. Fox was found guilty and sentenced to San Quentin for 1 to 6 years. And this appeared, there are numerous articles in the papers, in the Santa Ana Register and the Los Angeles Times over these court appearances. This one is interesting because while he was in jail, he was out on bail and he didn't show up when he was supposed to. And so they had to put him in jail. They found him up in Humboldt, I think. And while he was in jail, he read in the papers that Woodrow Wilson's investment property was in arrears in taxes. And so he decided to pay it, and it was only like $37 or something, but he thought he would get good publicity out of this and maybe, win a parole or whatever. It didn't work, but the taxes were paid, and he made it into the newspapers. In 1920, Anna puts all this behind her. She's a real estate agent living in Laguna Beach, and there is her real estate shop, and right above the sign it says A.G. Walters. And then over on the right, it says she's the exclusive agent for the Skidmore brothers. She represents the Skidmore brothers, the developers of the San Juan Point Corporation in Dana Point. And that corporation develops in 1923-24. And we really didn't know that until Carlos found this book when we were up at a preservation conference in Oakland. And he went over to the Bancroft Library at Berkeley. And he had seen this on the internet, and so he went over and was able to buy the photographs, and we have the book that we printed. So that helped us because it told us a lot about what existed in Dana Point in 1923-24. And basically it was the Bluff Top Park, which they call the Scenic Walk, and you can still see some of those stanchions, if you want to call them that, with the ropes between along the walk. If you look in the right place and it's not too overgrown where you're looking, you can still see some of those cement stanchions. Has anybody ever seen those when you're out there walking? And of course, a lot of the stonework is there. Stephen, did you notice any of that today? Some of the stonework and so forth down below in the old original park. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the people that were in charge of the San Juan Point Corporation, they called their subdivision Dana Point, but they were the investors. J.L. Beebe was president, P.H. Crick was vice president, A.G. Walters was the executive manager and salesperson, and Joe Skidmore, one of the two Skidmore brothers in Laguna, was the secretary-treasurer. None of those people stick around very long, except for Anna Walters. In 1924, Anna invited 30 women members of the California Real Estate Association, and they met at a luncheon in Dana Point. Now, the only place in Dana Point you could have lunch at that time was in the Scenic Inn. And so she was written up as a pioneer Laguna Beach realty woman, inviting all these people down there. And by 1925, you can see the Scenic Inn on the right there. But now she's advertising also her house that she built in 1925 up on the top of the headlands, not the very top, but about where the chart house is today. And her gardens were quite large. I mean, if you look at that now, you think, well, where would all these gardens be? But looking at the cliff then and now, I think there's been a lot of erosions over time. And of course, the most recent one is right below the gazebo that just happened several months ago. And the county's talking about, and we hope it is more than talk, moving it back before we lose the 1927 gazebo.
So her house is the bottom?
Her house is at the very, very bottom here, yes, in this picture.
And what's the one right above it?
There's two seats right up here. Sorry, next.
What's the, is that also her house right above it? The second one down?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Looks like the garden at the corner of the house.
That's her garden.
That's her gardens, yeah. And then over to the right is the Scenic Inn. Yeah, so this is mostly just scenery. Didn't you show the Scenic Inn also by itself?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't look over there at the time I was reading. Okay. So Anna Walters advertises as a track manager in Dana Point with Merrick and Ruddick Inc., a realty firm in Los Angeles. I think that would be sort of like Coldwell Banker is today, where they're a big real estate firm. That's her house and garden. Anna's home on Green Lantern appears with the Scenic Inn in the Los Angeles Times ad that we just showed you. Anna advertised free lunches also at the Dana Point at Dana Point on Labor Day. And so there's a photo coming up, I think, of a lot of people sitting in the scenic inn taking advantage of those lunches. There's the article with the free lunch, right? And then the next one should be, whoops, it's not there. Should have been the scenic inn. It's hiding. Okay, but we know what it looks like. Okay, if you come back to it. In 1927-28, Anna's name appeared on Woodruff's documents as the investor of 2 lots, or on 2 lots, for homes on Chula Vista Avenue, financed by Lincoln Mortgage. And those 2 homes are still there. They're well preserved. And the owners of one of them are with us today, the Schultzes. And I don't know if, is Tim Hardy here? They own the other house on, excuse me? Yeah, it was Schultz's home. Yeah. In 1929, Marguerite Casey Walters married Alfred Eugene Guy at Mission San Juan Capistrano. And that's their wedding picture, their formal wedding picture. Alfred was an U.S. Army captain in the Military Intelligence Reserve and an officer in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Photos were taken at the mission and in Anna's gardens. And the mission arch that you see behind her had just been restored over the past 10 years, starting in 1919 by Father O'Sullivan. And there's a close-up of the wedding party. Anna is the lady with the long pearls that's off to the right, and she has a hat on.
The bride of this was
Okay, where am I? And then in 1930, that's the picture in her garden. And you can see that there's more height to the hill in that picture too. In 1930, Anna and 9 others petitioned to annex Dana Point to the Capistrano Beach Sanitary District. Now, by this time, she and Woodruff were at odds about a number of things, and Woodruff already had applied to the Orange County Board of Supervisors, and so he filed suit to halt the petition of these other 10 people to join the Capistrano Beach Sanitary District. In 1930, the National Midwinter Flower Show in Encinitas awarded first place to Mrs. A.G. Walters for the best collection of Dutch or Spanish irises. Now, they're not necessarily in this picture, but you can see that in 5 years she had quite a garden built around her house and on her grounds. Let's see, Anna enjoyed entertaining friends and family, including Helen, her niece, who was actually Marguerite's sister, and Helen's son was Hal, her Anna's great nephew. And unfortunately, the 2 of them could not be with us today. This is Helen, and that is Hal and his wife Ursula. And he was in World War II. He flew airplanes, and he was also a airline pilot after the war, and has a wonderful memory. Let's see if I can read this. And Marguerite and Alfred Guy Jr. were in the 1930 census, living in the house on Green Lantern at Anna's house. So this guy later on becomes a colonel in the Army, right, Stephen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And
That's the pussy colonel.
That's Shirley Temple.
yes.
We got that one confused.
And this is the same man who becomes a colonel later, but he's only about, what age would you say he is, David?
3.
Okay, and he was a stand-in actor?
For Shirley Temple.
And just tell the story that you told me via email.
Oh, well, my uncle, the Colonel, had a man cave war room with all of the paraphernalia of his father's World War I and World War II experience. And we'd visit Sunland Hills regularly, and this picture of Shirley Temple hung in the man cave, which kind of confused me growing up as a child. Why would this colonel of the army have this picture? And when I went to his funeral, his wife, my Aunt Mary, explained to me that that was Gene in the picture. That his father, who used to drive actors home in the 30s, the studios depended on him to get him home safe, made lots of friends with the Hollywood movie stars, and they were invited to a Paramount Studios get-together, and Shirley Temple and her mother were there. And my grandparents brought Gene there, and he was dressed up, curly locks and everything. And they got confused, and Shirley Temple's mother thought that that was his daughter. And the studio saw the resemblance and went ahead and talked to Alfred and Marguerite about having their son do stand-in work for Shirley Temple. And then the next job he got was he was part of the Hour Gang in The Little Rascals. So he was one of the little kids who would be like doing this when Alfalfa and Spanky were up there doing shows.
And that's, you know, you probably, we all have maybe photographs in our family somewhere in a box or maybe even out still that has those hand-tinted colors on them. Just, you know, it's you'll see it downstairs in the exhibit.
They didn't have color film then, so they would
So, on July 29th, in 1932, Anna Walters died on June 6th at the age of 59 years in her home on Green Lantern. And that seems so unexpected because her father lived into his 80s and her mother, you know, would probably have lived longer had it not been for that runaway horse. So, Stephen, what did Hal say about that? You said last night.
I don't recall what he said.
He said that the depression had been really hard on her.
Yeah, he mentioned that she sank most of her resources into Dana Point in the early years. And when the economy crashed, she had only sold a couple of houses. And so by the time the date of her death happened, he felt that the economy really killed her. The stress from the depression and working her way through the depression. And shortly after she died, the depression ended, and it was in about 36, he said, where in Dana Point the economy started taking off again.
Well,
and Dana Point started growing back.
Yeah, I would think it would have even been later than 36, but yeah. Yeah. Okay, yes, in this photo, David sent me, and downstairs we have it, a photograph of it without the frame. And who would like to tell me who's in the photo?
Well, the handsome young man is that rather portly.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Did you say handsome young man?
Did you say portly?
Only a mother could get away with it.
That's David. Stephen here is the
Short one.
short.
The younger one.
That's my husband Andrew, who was Anna's, oh dear, help me.
Grandson.
And the girl in pink is my daughter Laura, who's now living in Montana with us. And the little white dog is Lambie, and the black and white dog is Boozer. I know you need that information. And the younger one is Deanna, and she lives with her husband and 3 children in Denmark, permanently.
And yes, that's their permanent residence. And she visited here, actually they all visited here with Janet last summer. Deanna, her husband Peter, and their 3 daughters, right? Yeah. Okay. In 1932, on July 29th, this classified ad appeared in the Los Angeles Times. To settle estate beach home on Stillwater Bay at Dana Point, most beautiful home site on the California coast, home of the late Anna G. Walters. Also other business and home sites on beach frontage and boulevard to be sold at great sacrifice. May be seen by appointment. A.E. Guy, room 350, County Courthouse, Los Angeles. So, and today, in 2018, Anna's Blue Lantern building that she had built by Faye Spangler, who was an architect in Santa Ana. It was actually built by Western Construction, which was a Woodruff affiliated company, and only really recently have I found out that it was owned by William Sherman, as like, you know, Sherman Oaks and Sherman Gardens in Corona Del Mar, that's Sherman. The Blue Lantern gazebo remains a popular viewpoint, except that it's all fenced off right now. And the signature street lanterns have been restored or replicated in La Plaza and the Lantern District. And the houses that are on the historic register, and so is the Blue Lantern building, is now the Coastal Kitchen, are on the historic register, and I think all qualify for the Mills Act. This is the house owned by the Hardys, Mr. and Mrs. Tim Hardy, and they've restored it, and it has an addition, but it is considered a historic home, and you can see the little historic plaque on the right of the arch opening. And this is the home of
Right across the street.
Dee and Don Schultz, and it's the most immaculate garden on our street. It too has had an addition to it, but the original house still stands like it was. And Don and Dee, would you like to add anything to that about your home?
Been a great place to live.
Yeah,
Happy to be there.
we're glad to have you on our street. And of course, this is the gazebo before it was fenced off because of the landslide. And that landslide, it looks like it's just right up to the very base of the gazebo right now. Interestingly enough, it's on, for the Guy's family information, it's on county property, and it's called the Sampson Overlook. But the locals call it the Blue Lantern Gazebo. And it was part of what would have been the city development until the county took over and built the harbor. And then it became county property. So with that, I think we'll close with the slides, right?
That's the last slide.
And turn the lights back on, and we'll invite the Guy family to turn their chairs around. Yeah. Now we have a hand mic, and when you're talking, for example, when you read your grandfather's thoughts, you need, for the sake of the tape that we're making, to hold that right up to your mouth. Okay? All right. Do you want to start? Would you like to read that? Start off with?
Sure.
Okay, why not? Jump in.
So my name is Michelle. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and it's so unfortunate that Hal and Ursula can't be here. But it's great to be a part of this heritage, and it's such a privilege for myself. And so with that being said, he went ahead and sent something over, so I'll go ahead and read this to you guys. So it says, Dear Barbara, my name is Hal McNichol Jr. I'm 90, he says 96 years old, he's actually 97 years old.
No, that was last year when you wrote that.
Oh, okay, so it makes sense. Okay, so I'm 97 years old. Man, I look great for 97, let me tell you. And an ex-World War II Navy pilot and retired airline pilot. My wife and I live in Rancho Bernardo, a lovely retirement village just north of San Diego. My grandmother was Catherine Eimers, sister of Anna G. Walters. The Eimers family had immigrated to Iowa from Hanover, Germany. They had 3 daughters and a son, Catherine, Anne, Gertrude, and Frank. The Eimers had a dry goods store in Iowa. When my grandmother Catherine was 13, the family sold the store, joined a large covered wagon group, and headed to California. My grandmother Catherine told me that the trip was long and uneventful, and they didn't even see any Indians. They came through the pass in the Sierra Nevadas, just to the east of San Bernardino. I had wonderful memories of Dana Point and my great aunt, Anna G. Walters. My mother and I drove to Dana Point often to see Aunt Annie, who was raising Marguerite, my mother's sister. My grandmother Catherine had her first husband, Frank Casey, had a dairy farm in Los Angeles. Her husband, my grandfather's grandfather, was painting the house and barn and died of what they called painter's colic, which was from the lead in the paint. He left my grandmother a widow with 3 small children. My grandmother married again, Nels Anderson. When she divorced Nels was not fond of children, Catherine asked Aunt Annie to take care of Marguerite. During the early and mid-1920s, he really loved going to Dana Point and staying at Aunt Annie's home there on the hill overlooking the harbor. It wasn't noted in your letter, but I was always under the impression that Aunt Annie and her husband, Mr. Walters, owned a pickle farm in Tulare in Northern California. I was also under the impression that it was when Mr. Walters died that Aunt Annie moved to Laguna Beach and then Dana Point. I assumed that the money she received from the sale of the pickle factory eventually was used to purchase property in Dana Point. I was born in 1920 and still remember when I was around 7 to 10 years old, how wonderful it was to climb up and down those steps from the gazebo down to the water and walk out to the pier. I even remember when Margie, my mother's sister, was married to Alfred Guy in the mission at San Juan Capistrano. You mentioned the first building, a gas station on Blue Lantern and Pacific Coast Highway. What you may not know is that around 1927 or 1928, rum runners were using the apartment over the gas station as a lookout. The rum runners would sail in and use the pier as a base off the cliff to unload the spirits. For some reason, they didn't use the steep road from the pier up and around Aunt Annie's home, but used the stairs up to the gazebo. One day there was a running gun battle from the gas station to the gazebo. Aunt Annie would turn over in her grave if she knew how beautiful Dana Point was today. My wife Ursula and I would enjoy talking to you, and if sometime your husband is feeling better, we would be happy to drive up and meet you. With best regards, Hal McNichol Jr. P.S. This was written by my grandmother. And yes, if you have any information, you can I don't know who the best person would be, but essentially any information or questions that would be directed to you guys, and then I'm sure you could direct them right over. But as you said, he's 97 and he's so cognitive and can recall memories from so many years ago. And as a result, because he has so many great stories, this being one of them, and also his time in the Navy as a commercial pilot, as a private pilot, and then retiring, he wrote a book. So if anybody is interested in that book, I'm sure we would be able to get you the information to how you can get that. But yeah, so that's from Hal. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it on.
And then I think that's what we ought to do is, well, I have one comment. The comment about Hal remembering for Anna and 3 other siblings. Those were the ones that Hal knew as a boy. There were actually 10 children, but the 6 earlier children were so much older. The oldest daughter was about 16 years older than Anna, that I don't think that he knew them, you know.
No, I think he was closest with those
Mhm.
ones and knew those ones.
And those are the ones he relates to.
In Iowa too. They stayed back in Nebraska and Iowa too.
Some of them, yeah. Okay, so Stephen, any comments?
No real comments, no. With the exception of, I got to sit and my family got to have dinner with Hal just the other night for the first time. And that guy is sharp as a tack. 97 years old, and he is sharper than I am at 47 years old. I am envious. He went on and on about being at that wedding in '29 and how beautiful the gardens were and how beautiful the wedding was, how much he enjoyed going to visit his great Aunt Annie. He loved his Aunt Annie. He loved visiting her house in Dana Point. He had a lot of good memories. I can barely remember Thursday.
Are you serious?
You are the family patriarch now. Eat it.
Grandfather's thing.
Okay, so, David.
This is not my thing.
Okay.
So what would you like to know?
What memories do you have of, that you were told by your father or your grandfather about Anna Walters?
Oh my. The only memories I have of my uncle, Gene, and my father telling me about Aunt Annie and their mother, Marguerite, was they were a bit, I don't know how to put it into words, regal. They called their mother the Duchess. Behind her back, I'm sure. From seeing all of this information, it's more information than I think we've ever had of our family lineage. But you can tell that just to be a pioneer in that day when California was in a state of transition between Mexico and the United States, and to accomplish what she did was, I mean, that would have totaled me out at 53 years old. I think the best memories I have, and I wish I could find that picture, was my grandmother Marguerite with me feeding ducks in a park. And she was dressed in an Easter dress and looked just like the Queen Mother. It's the same dainty pink lace outfit. And I remember looking at that picture when I got older, thinking to myself, am I related to the Queen? Because I just saw Princess Diana's wedding, and I swear that's the Queen Mother. We have, I think, more memories about my dad and my uncle. Grandpa Al passed away 80, 81.
I'm too old to remember.
I was in high school. So this has been a kind of an exploration for all of us, meeting cousins and family. I met Hal at my Uncle Gene's funeral, a grand Catholic Irish wake with a woman in a kilt singing a dirge. And I made the mistake of saying something to Hal that cost me a 3-hour lecture. He introduced himself as Cousin Hal. And he said he was Hal McNichol. And I said, McNichol? That's not a French name. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, we're French. My last name is Guy. David André de Guy. And he says, French? You're Irish. And he sat down with a bottle of Irish whiskey for 3 hours and a book this thick on our family history, and sat there and grilled me on our Irish history, the Caseys and the McNichols. I was schooled hard. So yes, we're Irish. I will have to say that now for the rest of my life, not French.
Well, is it both French and Irish, or is it?
It's Scotch-Irish.
Scotch-Irish? I don't know, we're mutts.
Now, okay, so who was from Montana originally?
The Guy family, the other, Alfred Guy's family had built, I know one of his relatives built the first built one of the first Catholic churches in Helena, Montana, and they had a ranch there. And my husband would go to the Flathead Lake in Montana, the huge, largest body of water, natural water west of the Mississippi. And he would go there as a child to a little tiny rustic cabin called Safety Bay. And he also went to the ranch quite a few times over in Montana, in Helena. And I had a couple comments that my feeble brain has brought back.
Marguerite, as you saw that not very attractive picture of her as a bathing beauty, there are really some nice pictures. I don't know if my sons were drinking or what they were doing. There were some really pretty
Your
pictures.
sons are always drinking.
She actually went through a little period where she was a Max Sennett bathing beauty. And there are some really very attractive pictures of her, much nicer than that one. if you watch.
There's a couple of pictures downstairs, other ones.
Oh, good, maybe you'll get those. And there's one other thing which I'm 80 now, my elderly brain has forgotten. What was the other thing?
You were on Helena.
Well, we ended up in, when my husband retired, I'll just tell you quickly why we're in Montana. When my husband retired abruptly from hospital administration down in Tucson, he was only 56 and kind of in shock. And we took a trip up to Montana and through all the way to Canada and every place. And he was really very nervous and upset over the sudden change in his life. So he promised me next year we would go back. So we went back the next year and rented for 3 months, the year after that for 7 months, and then we purchased. And I am privileged after living in hell for 32 years in Tucson, Arizona. I was born and raised, I've lived everywhere in California you can think of. But I now live about a football field above Flathead Lake, and I look across 16 miles of water to the Rocky Mountains. I'm so blessed. I hope to reach the beach.
I still live in hell.
We're neighbors, we have a place on the front end.
Oh, you do? Where?
Near Rollins.
Oh, down there. Okay, I'm in Summers. I'm right, actually, I'm right smack on the border. My address is Summers, and my house is in Lakeside. Go figure that one, right?
To answer your earlier question, my grandfather, Al Sr., who we called Captain Al, who was the one who married Walter's daughter, my grandma, his family immigrated down, I believe, through Canada into Montana in the 1800s, and he was born in Helena, Montana in 1899, I believe. So that was where our Montana roots come from.
And I copied his birth certificate. I don't know if I have it with me, but it was in, I think, that church in,
Yes.
in St. Is it St. Helena? No, it was St. Helena Church in Helena.
Cathedral, yes.
Yeah.
They made a movie there with Brad Pitt. Three Brothers. They did that, but there was also a film, wasn't the one with Brad Pitt where they went to war, World War I?
Oh, yes.
That ranch, that was the property acreage.
I have no idea. We just read the Bible and drink whiskey. We don't watch movies.
So when we were having dinner last night, it was last night, right? Or the night before? It was last night. You know, my grandfather was talking about how he would, him and his mother would come down to Dana Point, and at that point, you know, there was no infrastructure and roads, and cars were just on the evolution there. And he said that it would take them upwards of 4 hours to get from West Hollywood all the way to Dana Point, and having to stop and eat.
It still takes 4 hours.
And it still takes you 4 hours.
Now because of traffic, then because you said you had to go through all
about 20 miles.
Sure, and you know, it was just interesting, and then also, so my grandfather's mother, when she remarried, as you were speaking about Hollywood, the gentleman that she was very fond of, they had one of the very first houses in West Hollywood on Melrose and La Cienega, and I actually grew up in that house, and he grew up in that house, and there's a picture of him, 3 years old, on a tricycle, sitting right in front of the house, and you can see one telephone pole for as far as the eye can see, and you know, and that's on Melrose. Now you look down, you can't even see halfway down the block, and just to imagine what it was like during that time is so incredible to me, and to see it change. But they started off with that one house, and then she met a man, and he ended up building the back house, and it was wonderful. And then we all lived there for years and years. And it was in 2004, I believe, that they eventually sold the house, and it was probably the best thing that they could have ever done because, I mean, he's 97 now and has been living in Rancho Bernardo for about 13 years, and for somebody that age to be in Los Angeles at this time is just, yeah, it's not a place that you would want to be now. But yeah, it was an honor to see everything, and I can't imagine to be a person in his eyes and to see everything evolve and change. And so yeah, I just thought I'd share those last things with you.
So what does the G in Anna G. Walters stand for? What do you think?
Well, that was a mystery until we received at dinner the other night, a family tree from Old Hal that was apparently researched by a member of the Eimers family, and it had her listed as Gertrude, if I recall correctly.
Anna Gertrude?
Yeah.
Eimers.
Anna Gertrude Eimers Walters. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the G.
And that's the only thing better than that original picture was the name Gertrude. Really nice.
I knew the cutest girl, and her nickname was Trudy.
That is cute.
Yeah. So, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask?
Well, I have a comment. I went to Alexander Hamilton High School in LA, and the thing to do at grad night was to drive all night to Dana Point and have breakfast at the Dana Point Cafe. That's what we called it. That's the Blue Lantern Cafe. And it's a long drive, like you said, 4 hours, because we didn't have fun things like, the kids do today. And it was a long drive, and it was a very tiring night. And I think we would have liked to go to Disneyland.
Hal went to Hamilton.
Oh.
Yeah, he went to Fairfax, or he went to Hamilton, and he graduated from Fairfax.
Oh.
Probably a little earlier than you, that he graduated. Anybody else? Sandy?
Okay, so we've got the Woodruff houses. We got Mrs. Walters' houses. But we know where Woodruff houses are. We've identified 2 Anna Walters houses. How many houses did she have built? Because there's been a discussion about, they look very similar in style, of course, the Spanish colonial. But, so how do we differentiate between Anna Walters' house and a Woodruff house?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's really difficult because she stayed on when, after Woodruff came. And Stephen just gave us some legal papers Monday. He dropped a whole bunch of things and then went off. And so we spent a couple of hours, Keith and I, just going through them, and we had them scanned. I told you that at Coastal Blue. So I think we can pour over those, but there's a couple of things. Other than her home that she built in 1925, we don't think anything else was built to speak of until Woodruff came down and Western construction was here. That's what, now there may be exceptions to that. For example, and I contacted, I think his name is John Seaman. Is he here? John Seaman? His uncle and father built all that, all those walkways and the stone walkways and so forth, and Doris mentions that in Homeport for Romance. And I know that they had a home right down in Dana Cove, where he raised his family, one of the 2 brothers. So there were other buildings there, but she was the only one that actually built something as part of Dana Point. Before that, it wasn't, it wasn't called Dana Point. And then Woodruff comes in, and it's actually Western Construction that builds the Blue Lantern Fountain Luncheon Station. She owns it, and she chose the architect and all of that. So I think, as far as I know, it was Woodruff that was doing the building, and she was here. And I think she owned quite a bit of land, judging from that one article that you saw that said, her estate sale and lots of lots that were, yeah. But I don't think they were built on. And Hal said something to you, Stephen, about She only sold about 2 houses it was due to the Depression, you know. Woodruff starts his hotel, but doesn't finish it. There's just so many things that are happening then. And unfortunately, a lot of these papers in the Woodruff collection that we have and these papers, there's friction going on between the people who own the land and people who have interest in the land, and people aren't paying their taxes, or they're not paying, I mean, people are really, you know, hard pressed for cash. So I don't think a lot got built. Sure.
The document that we showed up here that showed to the 2 Walters houses on Chula Vista, that document is a Dana Point syndicate document where they were getting funding from Lincoln Mortgage to build those 10 homes. So that was actually the Dana Point syndicate that was putting that together at the time, and Anna G. Walters was involved with that. I don't know if she was a syndicate member or not, but she certainly was invested in with the same thing that the syndicate was invested in.
Yeah, she might have had the down payment on that construction, and it was financed by Lincoln Mortgage, and then when that house would have sold, she would have, you know, the theory was she would have made money on her investment over and above what the house would have sold for.
How long, Barbara, how long did the house on Green Lantern last? When was it taken down?
I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody?
What did she say?
The house
The house, Anna Walters' house, when was it taken down?
in 72, when Joy Cabell bought the property, built the courthouse. Or 71 is when he bought the property. The courthouse was built in 72, started in 72.
So it was there till about 71?
72. It was, I think it was empty for a year or 2 before that. But Joy
Okay.
bought it in 71.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I didn't know that officially. I know that, so it was there. I guess I never looked because we were too busy trying to figure out what to do with our house to know that there was another one on that bluff.
And talking about the gardens, some of our older aerial photos show those gardens all the way up to Harbor View.
And do you get the impression that there was more land then before
Yes.
the landslide? Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that, but the
Well, it
property
just-
was pretty wide.
Yeah, it sure doesn't look like there's that much property now, but when you look there, but maybe. That's about the same time, Richard, wasn't that about the same time that the 1971, when they widened Coast Highway and they took down the Ridgefield sign? Wasn't that about the same time? Yeah, a lot of things were happening then. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
I would like to hear why she built the Blue Fountain Lodge, or had it built, when she did, and why she put it there.
Well, she was a business, she wanted to have, she had,
Because there was no road, correct? Yeah.
well, there was very little road, it was still a dirt road.
And when did the Roosevelt Highway
When was it finished?
It was finished paved in 1929. In July, they had a big celebration to open the road. They had a barrier put across it and ran a bulldozer through it, opened up. Governor Young, from California governor, came down for that opening. And so that's endorsed Walker's book that explains that.
But did she know that that was going to be coming through?
Yes, they knew. It was all the way up the coast to
The
Canada.
Roosevelt Highway, which was named at that time, was planned in 1914, and it was supposed to go all the way from Canada to Mexico. And at that opening, Miss Canada and Miss Mexico were at that opening to help celebrate that. So,
So that's why she picked the lot where she picked to build that, the
She-
Blue Fountain Lodge.
Yeah, and in these papers that we were pouring over, and we'll have copies of them shortly, but I wanted to get them scanned so I could send them home with Stephen. There's a lot of controversy going on in the tract that is where the Blue Lantern Shopping Center is, across Blue Lantern. And so there seemed to be a lot of friction over who owned what and who had easements, and that was still in her lifetime. And then there's another great article. Evidently, your great-grandfather had sent in, so that's Alfred?
My grandfather was Alfred.
So Albert is Marguerite's husband? Which one? I have to look, I get confused.
Alfred Eugene Guy was her husband.
Okay.
Martin.
Yeah, Alfred.
Yeah, Martin.
Okay, so Alfred Eugene Guy was writing editorial letters to the newspaper protesting the fact that the county was going to take away public access to the beaches. And so then there was a long editorial, the whole length of the newspaper page, by the Register on the topic. And so it followed along the bluff, and it's just interesting that public access was an issue then, and then later on, when Liz and some other ladies were active and organized resistance, afraid we'd lose public access, right?
This is Marguerite's husband.
It was Marguerite's husband that was.
Wrote the editorial.
Yeah, and the letters, the letters, and then the Register replies back with an editorial, a long editorial. It was one of the really interesting clippings that you had in that group of papers.
But she built this business, I mean, it was the first business in Dana Point, and it's kind of and it's the only building there right in the middle of nowhere.
Right, but it was a corner, and they knew where the Coast Highway was going, or the Roosevelt Highway was going. So she was just looking ahead, and I think what happened was the building was completed. She probably had the lot since 1925, because that's where I think the city even put 1925 on the building when they designated it historic, because the title must go all the way back to 1925 under her name.
And the idea is that it was halfway between LA and San Diego, so it wouldn't be 4 hours, a 4-hour drive.
Right, all of that.
Just from LA
Yeah.
to
You can get, and then the other place, the Richfield Beacon, that was 1930-ish, I think.
They built it in 1926.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then the Dana Villa, and the idea was that there would be one of those beacons every 60 miles, so that you could count on, gassing up again, 60 miles. And then they were trying to also have the motel or the hotel right by the gas station, and have some place to have a meal too. All of that.
Gas.
I can't hear him.
Yeah, they had it going, yeah, all of it. When Anna Walters was here, she was here, but her mailing address was San Juan, and that was the closest post office in 1925. But I think she was a visionary, and she knew that was coming, and I think she just got a little ahead of the highway. But our matriarch, his husband worked in a couple of those gas stations, right? Did he ever work in
a gas station, and then if somebody stopped across the street at the buffet, he'd have to run over there and take their order and give them all grub sandwiches. Then he'd go back and work in the gas station.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Melvin Pierce came here with his family. He was a little boy in 1930. So he grew up, right? 1930, so he grew up here. He was only 7 at that time, and we just lost him a couple years ago. And Helen is our matriarch, the Historical Society's matriarch, and probably the longest resident that we know about in town. Okay, if there's no further questions, we have drinks downstairs, and we have food and snacks, and I have, Ruby and Violet and Jean, do you go by Jean or Eugene? Are out of school, right, this week? So do you have to give a report or anything when you go home? You don't have to tell the teacher where you were and the history of Dana Points and, no? Do you get extra credit if you do it?
But as soon as we get home, we're changing both of the girls' middle names to Lantern.
So,
We think it'll be good.
yes, what was that you discovered today?
That Hal had told us that he took a certain amount of pride that Annie Walters had, named a lot of the streets in town after the lights that she saw coming in on ships. Blue Lantern and Green Lantern, Golden Lantern, Ruby Lantern, and Violet Lantern. And we would have been thrilled if we had found a Eugene Lantern.
So two of his daughters, coincidentally,
It is a complete coincidence.
oh, okay, have the same names as two of our lantern streets. Okay, I have some things for you to take home just in case you want to work up a little report for us. Okay.
That's great.
Well, again, we thank you so much for the photos and the documents that you've sent us. So please join us downstairs.